The Forced Evolutionary Virus, or commonly known as FEV, is an artificial virus created by WestTech's Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Division, with its sinister ability to alter DNA strands. This biological virus was harnessed by different organizations and individuals for their own purpose before and after the Great War. But what exactly is the Forced Evolutionary Virus? Why was it created? And most importantly, how has it affected the wasteland? Well, we're going to get to all of that in today's episode, where we dive into the story of FEV. Before we could talk about FEV, we have to go back to the early 2050s within the United States. Because before the Forced Evolutionary Virus, there was an epidemic spreading across the United States. An infectious disease known as the New Plague. In attempts to control the spread of the disease, citizens who felt sick were told to stay in isolation and containment, with symptoms such as unexplained contusions and swelling, and as well as painful hemorrhages. This plague was so widespread that the national quarantine was mandated in 2053. And after nearly 2 years in the pandemic, a research company called WestTech started to develop a cure for the plague, establishing the WestTech Research Facility, located in Southern California. This epidemic became the reason behind the Pan-Immunity Virus Project, which later paved the way for development of the Forced Evolutionary Virus. But unfortunately, WestTech was unable to develop a cure. Despite their close ties with the federal government and their work in the viral research throughout the Pan-Immunity Virus Project, the creative control of WestTech's research facility was handed over to the military in 2071. Under new orders, the direction of PvP was then prioritized as a defense against biochemical warfare in response to the aggressive use of biochemical weapons by China. And in order to combat the newest biological weapons, the decision was made to create a viral defense that would alter unaffected DNA to render it immune to standard viral infection. Which leads us to discuss about batch 10-011. The first experiments took place in March of 2075 on single-celled organisms. While their base metabolism appeared unchanged, their immunity to infection and radiation exceeded all earlier expectations. The FEV effects researched on plants proved unsuccessful. So the next stage started infecting flatworms in May of 2075. They exhibited a 28% increase in size and resistance to 9 separate viral contagions within hours. In June of 2075, we saw the next stage of experimentation, for several labs contained strains of white mice that had been infected successfully with FEV. And within hours, they exhibited increased growth, stabilizing at a 31% size increase after only 9 days. Most increased size in muscle tissue and certain internal organs, including the liver, heart, and kidneys. An increase of intelligence was also noted, allowing mice to run mazes in less than half the time required by normal mice. The final test experiments occurred with rabbits in November of 2075, in which 218 rabbits were infected, half of which were implanted with electrodes to monitor changes in EEG activity. Increased electrical activity was noted 3.2 seconds after the infection, accompanied by the typical increase in size. A new effect was noted, noticing an increase in aggression and posturing. The dissection of the brains showed an increased dendritic connections, particularly in the limbic system and frontal cortex. Experiments continued with the new batch 11-011. This new virus batch proved to be more effective compared to the previous batch by nearly 43%. The test subjects contained over 50 raccoons, which were infected with the new strain, and with the expected size increase, behavioral tests confirmed an increase in intelligence and manual dexterity. But unfortunately, the subjects escaped confinement and had to be hunted down. After retrieving nearly 50 of the raccoons, there were still 2 raccoons unaccounted for. And it was with these results alone that led down the sinister path of developing superhumans. But further testing was needed. The WestTech facility, located in Appalachia, joined the research in improving the FEV project, with orders to begin human testing in order to push FEV to its practical limits. The research team was well aware that no citizens in Appalachia would volunteer for such testing. So, West Tech decided to do it without them even knowing, and started off with the little town of Huntersville by poisoning their water supply to observe the effects of long-term low-level exposure. The experiment began in February of 2076, providing valuable research data for the project. The citizens of Huntersville had no idea this was even happening until they started feeling ill symptoms. Reaching out to West Tech's facility for help, the citizens were then isolated and monitored within their own confinement. They began to mutate, resulting in horrific side effects, such as one subject was unable to breathe because of rapid tissue growth, and a subject with teeth growing so large that it actually pierced a brainstem through their own head. And due to the nature of the virus and its unpredictability, the facility's objective was to identify and isolate the FEV strains through a variety of methods. Further development occurred after several new genes were discovered. The team spliced the FEV batch into a new batch called 11-101A, and this batch was used to infect dogs of pure and mixed breeds. These results concluded in immediate growth, accompanied by increased aggression but no increase in intelligence. These subjects were then terminated after 14 weeks of study. The remaining citizens of Huntersville began to notice that the residents that went to West Tech never returned. Causing fear and confusion, the citizens attempted to leave the town, but were met with military defenses, disallowing anyone from leaving. While this was going on, the FEV research in California was then transferred to the Mariposa military base. Meanwhile, another research effort was also being set up by Voltex Corporation in Washington, D.C., furthermore in Vault 87. Enjoying the episode so far? Don't forget to smash that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy Fallout content. Now, let's get back to the story about FEV. A new hybrid batch was born called 11-111, established in October of 2076. This variant was used to infect chimpanzees, as their growth and immunity levels were unprecedented. Increased aggression led to isolating the subjects by the science team, while violent epileptic seizures caused 2 subjects to expire. The rest was terminated after all data was mined successfully. Despite the protests from the science team, in January of 2077, FEV research in California was then transferred to the Mariposa military base. Variant 11-111 has been chosen as the basis for further development through human experimentation, because this batch was nearly a 100% success rate on lab animals, granting approximately 60% increase in size and a potential 200% intelligent increase. In other words, this was the perfect variant for mass-producing super soldiers, and would eventually be identified as FEV-2. The research at Vault 87 was under the lead of Dr. Wayne Merrick, cooperating with the team at Mariposa. Despite his efforts though, he was unable to improve batch 11-111 to reach satisfactory needs. The humans that were subjected to the strains in Vault 87 exhibited superior physical developments such as increased size, strength, and endurance to environmental factors, but were also characterized by significant mental disability and extreme aggression to non-mutants. But that's a story we could get further into in another video. The science team at Mariposa reached a maximum success. They succeeded in creating the FEV2 strain, able to create powerful super soldiers, exhibiting superior physical powerness, resistance to combat damage, aging, and disease, as well as a minor loss to intelligence. In certain cases, intelligence could actually increase by the virus. But however, before the testing could begin in full, the soldiers under the command of Roger Maxson, who was guarding the base during the time FEV was being tested on prisoners of war, Maxson rebelled against the scientists as they discovered the atrocities that were being done in the lab. They rebelled and executed the science staff. The soldiers then sealed off the facility, for the FEV vats would become untouched for many years to come. For the bombs began to fall as the Great War begun. The vats were then rediscovered in 2102, long after the bombs fell. A wastelander leading an expedition by the name of Harold, accompanied by a man named Richard, managed to crack open the Mariposa base security and infiltrate the lower levels. However, within the vats, the automated crane crashed into the two, knocking Harold out and pushing Richard into one of the vats filled with FEV. Harold woke up sometime later outside the base with some notable mutations due to the exposure of the FEV fumes, becoming a ghoul-like mutant rather than a super mutant. Richard, on the other hand, underwent extreme mutation due to the prolonged exposure to the virus. His intellect grew exponentially, allowing him to comprehend even the most complex issues easily, gaining a major obsession to follow the research of FEV, experimenting with animals, and eventually captured scavengers that would stray into the facility. It was not to a few failed mutations that he discovered radiation count could be a deciding factor in the success of the change, leading him to pick the subjects more carefully this time. By carefully selecting his test subjects, he managed to create the first real super mutant in January of 2103. He went ahead and started calling himself the Master, as he slowly built up his foundation for his army between 2103 and 2130.
I am the Master. I do not have to answer to you.
But that is a story for another video in the future. Decades later, the remains of the Mariposa base will then become destroyed by a lone vault dweller. But later after the destruction, scouts and soldiers of the Enclave accidentally wandered upon the remnants of the Mariposa base in the months of July to August 2236, searching for the remaining samples of FEV2. They shortly uncovered the vats and secured the necessary scientific materials. However, those that were exposed to the raw virus in the ruins began to mutate, creating the second generation of super mutants. Due to the uneven nature of exposure, coupled with significant radiation count, meant that those that survived the change suffered from significant mental damage. Retreating from the base, the Enclave blasted the only remaining entrance, trapping the mutants inside. The Enclave's chemical core proceeded to work on the acquired samples of the virus, creating a staggeringly effective killer, tailored to provide maximum strength and minimal required exposure. However, weeks before the virus's deployment, the Enclave and the virus stockpiles were destroyed, though copies of the research were transmitted back to Raven Rock with an opportunity to fulfill their plans of genocide. But that is a long story for another video. Meanwhile, back on the East Coast, the Commonwealth supermutants are the best result of the Institute's research into FEV, which has continued since the early 2220s in a dedicated facility, when the original intention was to create a second generation of synths by creating a new breed of supermutants that would serve the Institute as laborers and soldiers. But due to the lack of success with mutants, efforts were then refocused with the goal of creating third-gen synths. The Organic Synth Project was spun off from the FEV research around 2227. While the FEV research continued for several more decades, both men and women were abducted from the Commonwealth and submerged in the Institute's modified FEV. Their mutations were carefully tracked. Successful mutations were monitored to ensure survivability, then tagged and discarded. The Institute was simply releasing supermutants back into the wild, creating a scourge upon the Commonwealth that lasted for years. But that is a story for a whole nother video. So overall, FEV came a long way in batches of multiple variants, and it's safe to say that not every forced evolution is the same. For the effects on supermutants and other wildlife reacted very differently in different areas across America. But that is the overview story of the Forced Evolutionary Virus, by how it was created and how it has affected the new post-apocalyptic wasteland. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode on the Forced Evolutionary Virus, then don't forget to hit that like button right down below and consider subscribing to the channel to show your support. And if you enjoy Fallout storytelling and content, don't forget to check out one of the videos down here below. And I just want to say thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. But until then, have a good one.